Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome back to the Spotlight, the Real Science of Sports news show. And we are steaming at pace towards the end of 2025, which means we're approaching the festive season. I hope you're all getting into the spirit of things. And it also means that we take a look back. It's that time of year when you sort of start looking back at the things that have gone on this year. And it's been an incredibly dense and busy year for, well, the world of sport, which means the world of this particular podcast. And as we were preparing our podcast topics for discussion in today's news show, we realized that there are these recurring themes because the same things are in the news this week that were in the news in March, in April, in June, in August. And so we decided that we would put a slant on this particular podcast where we look back at some of the things that have made the news, not in a headline way. So we're not talking about doping bans and world records and unprecedented dominance of cycling, etc. That's all stuff that we're going to talk about not next week, but in the podcast the week after that when we do a proper year in review. But this is kind of like a news you'd have seen and that we cover quite a lot in review show, and it includes a brief chat on GLP-1s in sport, a little bit on Red S, and some revisiting the teen phenoms in sport. And joining me to do that today is Gareth Davies from Wales, fresh off an ascent of Alpe du Zwift yesterday.
Yeah, my first time up Alpe du Zwift, and I can't believe that people do this sort of thing for pleasure. There are people out there who only train indoors. For me, it's like a necessary evil, and I really was wondering why I was doing it yesterday, going around those hairpins. But yeah, got it done. So
what proportion of your training will be indoors for the next 3 months, do you think?
I'd say probably 75%.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to get out on the bike when I can. It just gets a bit dangerous this time of year. It's dark, wet, slippery.
roads.
My bike handling skills aren't the best. Yeah, a lot of traffic around. So yeah, it's safer to be indoors. So I'm going to get it done there. Like I say, it's a necessary evil, so I can do what I want to do next year. It's sort of banking it for the future, isn't it? That's how we train.
Exactly. So, because speaking of looking back, this is the year you took up cycling. That'll be your 2025.
Pretty
highlight.
much, yeah.
So this is your first winter block of cycling training. I suppose I sort of do complain a lot about cycling in South Africa with the traffic and so on, but the one thing we don't have to suffer through are short winter days and dark, wet roads in winter. It's not ideal, but it's certainly not as bad as you have it, so I don't envy you that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get straight into it. There's a few small news stories that happened in the course of the last week, and something I think we both noticed was the World Cup draws were both held for rugby's 2027 tournament and football's 2026 tournament, which of course is in the US. That's one of next year's big sports events. And we both, I think, had similar sentiment about what they're trying to do with these tournaments. They're adding teams to them in an attempt, I think, understandably to grow them, but I think the greater risk, well, the risk is that they are diluting the product.
Indeed. Starting off with the football draw, and it's an absolute banger because we've got some cracking matches lined up. Well, actually, no, we haven't got any matches lined up whatsoever. We've got 12 groups of 4 teams, so 48 teams, and I cannot find a single match which I'd be interested in watching. It's so diluted now that you forget the group stages as far as I'm concerned. The opening match is Mexico versus South Africa. I mean, 2 titans in world football to really kick it off. So you might as well just glaze through the entire early rounds of the tournament because all they're doing is making sure that the big teams get through. Admittedly, there are a few teams still to be decided because of the European playoff system. But when you've got teams, I think we got Cape Verde getting through, teams like that, and teams like Italy might be on the sidelines, although I think they will qualify. They should handily beat Wales or whoever they face. I don't know. It's just money. That's all FIFA care about. Money and kissing Trump's ass at the minute. And so, yeah, you forget the World Cup for me next year, unfortunately, at least until the latter rounds.
You mean that you're not interested in seeing how Spain get on against the Cape Verde Islands or, for instance, Germany handle the mighty Curacao, which I'll be honest, if you gave me a map, I'd take some time to find it. I think I know which area it's in. I do, but
it's in the middle of Europe. It's rather large, Germany. Yeah.
So smallest nation ever to qualify, not Germany, right?
I think that they're the smallest because I thought it was going to be Cape Verde, but of this Curacao. I thought that was a drink, Curacao.
Uh,
I thought it was an alcoholic drink.
yeah, I know less about those than
I'm looking
geography.
at them there.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
It's awful.
yeah. I mean, like Group I's got France, Senegal, and Norway. You know that resembles like a group of death from a World Cup gone by in the past. You know, Argentina,
Come
Algeria,
on.
Austria. Yeah, you would have watched France, Senegal at a previous World Cup and said that's a reasonable group match. It's not all terrible. England, Croatia, Ghana in Group
Really?
L. Yeah,
England, Croatia, maybe.
and Ghana.
Oh, come on. You really are stretching it now. And this is the problem. You're becoming an apologist for FIFA.
Oh,
And I mean, it should be 32 teams. It's the World Cup. It should be the best in the world. And the thing is, they're talking about making it 64.
yeah, I know.
It's,
And I mean, even 48 into 32 means there's
God,
no jeopardy in those games. Even if they were good games, like England, Croatia, they're not necessarily, they're not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not necessary to win those games at all costs because 32 out of 48 are going through. So really the whole thing
no,
only
you're going to
kicks
see
off as a
players
knockout.
rested.
Yeah. Yeah,
And we saw this. Remember, we had this conversation at the Women's Rugby World Cup where the
exactly.
group stages just didn't catch fire because there just wasn't the matchups. And that's not really rugby's fault in women's rugby because you haven't got the strength in depth. They didn't try to overextend. It's just that they were working with what they had. In this case, they're working with what they have, but they've just got too much of it.
Yeah. No, I
You
had
know?
the same sentiment reading it. I don't think there's no good games, but there are very, very few. And I reckon even by the round of 32, there'll be some weak teams in it. And it'll take until the quarterfinals before I think my interest will really be piqued. So football's been a neglected sport on this podcast, and I don't see that this next year's World Cup is going to change that too much, unfortunately. Rugby, on the other hand, we
No,
do
and the
cover a
same with the
lot.
rugby one.
Yeah, so rugby we do
Yeah,
cover
the
quite a
rugby
lot,
one.
but the Rugby World Cup is also being expanded, and I think it's also it's going to cause more blowouts. There's no doubt, and so that means again you're probably waiting for quarterfinals for there to really be intrigue.
I mean, you've got England, Wales, which I suppose is a local rivalry, but England have got such an easy path through. Whereas it feels like FIFA have just smoothed it so everybody can get through. It feels like World Rugby have just lumped everybody in one side of the draw in a way, because I think New Zealand are going to have to go through every major nation if they want to get to the final, right?
Yeah, because
Well, I read it.
they go through Australia in the pools, they get potentially South Africa in the quarters. They only and then they go
And France, I
France in
think.
the semi-final and likely England, Argentina, Ireland in the final. So New Zealand's easiest match will be their first knockout match if they win their pool. And you can imagine, actually, it was frustrating here in South Africa, like, because a lot of people, even some in the media who really should be better than this, were going off about the pool being, the draw being rigged so that South Africa would have to face New Zealand in the quarterfinal and make it more difficult to win another World Cup. And you think, goodness me, like, it's one thing when, like, emotional, rabid fans jump to stupid conclusions, but when the media are doing it as well, it's just embarrassing. I sometimes cringe at the South African rugby fan mentality, but I do think, though, like in tennis, it would never happen that Sinner and Alcaraz land up on the same side of the draw at Wimbledon or French Open. 1 and 2 get split, top
Well,
and
that's what.
bottom. And if you're going to be critical of World Rugby for the draw, it's that they've put the 6 seeded teams, 1 per pool, and then they've just sort of allowed it to randomly fall where it falls. And that's why 1, 2, and 3 are all on one side.
And why have they done it so early? There's
I don't
a
know.
long
Like,
time between now and then.
yeah, and that's the other thing is that, everyone's going off like 1 and 2 will play each other in the quarterfinal. I'd be surprised if New Zealand are 2 by the time that World Cup kicks off. I don't think they will be. So anyway, there's a lot of hysterical reaction. But you're right. I don't know, why do you do it so early? It's not as though rugby teams need more time to get their base preparation and their sort of accommodation, training facilities, etc., scouted and scoped and ready. So I don't actually know. Maybe it's ticket sales. They want spectators to be able to plan their trip across the USA, which will be, I think it'll be a really cool World Cup from that perspective, actually, to travel through. But I think the men's tournament is going to throw up some pretty one-sided games. And then, unfortunately, the same thing as in the football, your the first knockout round is going to be a little bit of a holding pattern because very, very few of those first knockout rounds will have any jeopardy in them.
Yeah. England, South Africa in the final. I picked it already, looking at the groups.
Yeah.
Uh,
My dark
the old
horse
enemy.
pick is Australia will beat New Zealand in the pool. And Australia will top that pool. New Zealand will end up on England's side of the draw.
Yeah, I think New Zealand will probably throw that game against Australia. Soft throw it.
I don't think they'll need to throw it. I think they'll just get beaten. That's my prediction.
Okay.
That's 2027. We'll get there. We'll get there next year. Anyways, that's
We'll get there. We got a long time to talk about that. Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to talk about Valencia Marathon?
Yeah, that's got to be.
Things came out of that last week.
I mean, has there ever been a marathon where so many national records and fast times have been set? That's got to be now, like, emerging as the new place to go. If you can't do Berlin, you got to do Valencia, no?
Mm-hmm. There were three men's national records set and 6 women's overall. Petros being the highlight, I think, of Germany. Got silver, didn't he, at the World Championships
by
a hair's breadth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and he ran a 2:04:03, which is, it's what amazes me about marathon running is we're sort of almost disappointed when people are only running 2:04 these days.
Yeah, it is crazy actually, and I mean, I suppose we'll get on to Yi, but I should have looked where 2:04 ranks you this year. Probably still in the top 30 or 40, but you're right. It's kind of like if it's not 2:03 something, everyone goes, bad day.
Because Korea obviously won it. John Korea won it with 2:02:24, and we don't bat an eyelid now at these times, do we?
No.
It's getting so they all feel like they're so close, and I know obviously 2 minutes is a long time away from 2 hours, but everybody's battering at the door. It feels like.
And the women's winning time was 2:14, which is also incredibly fast. 4th fastest ever. 3rd if you sensibly eliminate that annoying time at the top of the list.
Goes to show that just conditions make so much difference
with
Valencia, and it was a little bit warm. I think they said in Valencia this year. We'll have to get that verified. But you mentioned Alex Yee because he ran the 2nd fastest time by a Brit, didn't he? In what was it, 2:06:38?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously Alex Yee coming from triathlon, I think he's dabbling. I think it's fair to say in I think it was only a 2nd marathon. I think he struggled a bit, didn't he, with illness when he ran. I think he ran London, and I don't think he's not permanently deciding to switch. But I was impressed, and I text you saying, look, Alex Yee, he's run 2:06.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible, for a triathlete. And I think you were far more underwhelmed than I thought you would be, weren't you?
No, I'm not underwhelmed. I'll say so 2:06:38 ranks him 88th in the world this year. Just for context, that's how crazy deep marathon running is now. Is that time in this is going back some time, but in 1988 the world record was 2:06:50 by Dinsamo of Ethiopia, and that record stood for like a number of years, almost a decade, until it was broken. He is now obviously faster than that, and he's only 88th this year. I looked it up; it's number 353 since the 2000s began. So that's 352 guys. But I think what he's shown is actually that he's probably was dabbling in triathlon. And he's actually a hell of a good world-class runner who was also very, very good at swimming and cycling. I think that's what his marathon exploits have shown.
Okay, if you frame it that way.
I
said to you, well, you wouldn't see. Yeah, I said to you, well, you wouldn't see Kipchoge, beating records on a bike or in the swim, would you?
No, and it's an interesting.
Yeah, I suppose it's easier to translate to running, isn't it?
If you've got the necessary, I think, neuromuscular and mechanical properties for it, because a lot of really good cyclists don't do well at running. We've seen a couple of elite cyclists try their hand at running. Did we speak earlier this year about Tom Dumoulin? We did, because he screwed up his pacing. Remember, he went out way too aggressively. So he's probably a high 60-minute half marathon guy if he gets his next half marathon pacing right, which is really good, but it's not 88th in the world at the half marathon. It's nowhere near that. A couple of weeks back, Greg van Avermaet won his age group in the half Ironman World Champs in Spain. That was the same weekend that we spoke very briefly about those. He was the Olympic champion in cycling, so he's now made a transition to triathlon, but in the age groups. So I don't think there's ever been a multi-sport athlete who's come to a single sport as successfully as Yi did at the time that they were the best at the multi-sport stuff. Remember at the start of the year, Blumenfeld spoke about riding the Tour de France, and I think abandoned that pretty quickly when he saw the watt requirements. But it's interesting because, like, I think you to run you need to have tendons. Like, running is efficiency of the muscle and the tendon unit working well together, and Yi obviously has that. But he also has the ability to produce force on the pedals concentrically, which is a slightly different motion compared to running. So that makes him, in a sense, unique. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to dismiss a guy who's 88th in the world at marathon running, but I'm more interested in the 202 guy who can only do one thing than the 206 guy who can do three. That's just the nature of how I see it. It's the same as decathlon. Like, when you watch Ashton Eaton and back in the day, Thompson, O'Brien, etc., like, it's incredible how good they are at 10 things. But I'd rather watch Duplantis jump 6:18 than a decathlon jump 5-something, even though he's really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there was a thread on Discourse discussing various cyclists and runners who've swapped over. James Whelan is one. There's Christian Mayer. Do you remember he became an ultra runner?
Yeah.
So there are examples, but they never seem to be the real top end, do they? It tends to be like sort of almost journeymen that can kind of flip and never actually hit the heights. Because like you say, there's such a difference between running 206.38 is fantastic, but it's like exponential. It's a huge drop off then to try and get anywhere near 202, 203. He's not going to do.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, it'd be interesting.
I actually remind.
Sorry, it'd be interesting to know what he thinks he can do now, because it is only a second one, and you would normally anticipate that from your second to your third to your fourth, you will still see some improvement. So is he going to look at this and say, I can be a 204 guy. I'm going to get Farah's British record. I think that's probably a realistic goal. Does he want to do that, or does he want to go back and win a triathlon medal in Los Angeles? I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean he's not going to be winning the Olympic medal in the marathon, is he? So it's all about priorities now. We are seeing a bit of this, like with Bol changing, McLaughlin changing, athletes just having a little play around and changing their distances, and I think it probably keeps them fresh as well mentally, doesn't it? Stops the grind. It gives them something new to learn.
Yeah, and as long as you always have an out. The challenge for Yi is that when you make the shift to become a serious marathon runner, and I think you can safely say that when you run 206, you've done that. In fact, that's actually, before I continue, be interesting to know in the last 8 months, since he started to focus for London, has he maintained any cycling and swimming at all as a form of cross training, or just to keep the sort of the water on simmer before it boils, or has he abandoned those sports entirely in favor of running? And if he has done the latter, how easily can he go back? That'll be quite interesting to see. Can you now go back again? You might get one change in your professional career, but you can't go back. Whereas Bol, I think, can pretty easily go back to the 400 hurdles. She's not going to lose from one season of 800s that ability. So yeah, he's an interesting one to actually follow, because he's got to decide what's worth more. Is it to be a double Olympic triathlon champ, or run top 5 in London in the marathon? Because if he can run 205, he could get that. Maybe top 5 in the Olympics in the marathon, which is worth more to him. Or just go run Ironmans. Imagine racing an Ironman against a guy like that. If you're not 15 minutes ahead of him off the bike, you're losing.
You're losing, yeah. Funny, I was looking through the lists of the British records for the marathon, and of course it reminded me about Steve Jones, the Welshman. Do you remember? You might not remember Steve Jones.
I remember the name.
I don't think he had the world record. He came very close to it. He ran 2:07:13 in Chicago, and that's back in 1985. That's 4 years ago. So that's pretty incredible when you consider all the advances we've seen over the last 40 years in shoes, nutrition, tech. And he was a part-time runner, Steve Jones. I think he worked in the RAF.
Yeah.
And I'd been watching a video about him ages ago about it. And apparently when he trained, he was none of this zone 2 stuff. He was like our zone 2 podcast. You should be doing everything intense. He used to run everything at like 5-minute mile pace. Everything.
Yeah.
That's all he used to do. And so yeah, going back 40 years. And so we've only improved the record. Well, Mo Farah he's a little bit ahead, isn't he? But I was joking, and I'm not being serious here, people. But I did say that Alex Yee, perhaps he's got the the clean British record for the marathon. So
Your words,
you'll have
not
to edit
mine.
that one out in post.
No, we leave it in there. Nothing gets edited out. I'm happy to leave it there though, and not challenge you on it. Is why I leave it there. Speaking of national records, so Steve Jones is still the Welsh record holder. The Welsh women's record fell in Valencia, incidentally. I don't know if you noticed that one.
Yeah, it was like the 7th one, wasn't it? Because I don't think Wales seems to be counted as a nation as such when it comes to World Athletics records.
I'll give it to you though. It's interesting to look at the world records for the national times, because I saw this post, I think by Chris Chavez on Twitter, in which he described the 3 men's and I think you said 6 women's records from Valencia. And it got me thinking, like, which nations have the best and worst national records in the marathon. Now, I know you did a bit of homework, so I'm going to ask you questions you probably know the answer to. But obviously, if you rank national records, if you list every country in the world and their national records and you rank them fastest to slowest, no surprise, Kenya's number 1 for men and women. Because Kiptum and Chepngetich somehow still has that record. Should be gone, but we've said that before. Number 2 for both is Ethiopia, and then it differs a little bit because Netherlands takes 3 on the women's side, Uganda's 3 on the men's side. Out of interest, do you happen to, are you looking at the list now? Because I'm going to go through the men's list. It's Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Belgium in 5th, France in 6th, then Petros moves into 7th for Germany with his Valencia time. Turkey is 7th. 8th is the Netherlands. 9th is now Norway, thanks to another time in Valencia. And then 10th is Eritrea. The interesting thing about that is every single one of those athletes is of African descent, even when they're representing Europe. I don't know if you noticed that in the list.
Yeah, I was looking down this list and I was looking at countries. I was expecting to see countries like Bahrain, United Arab Emirates appearing higher up the list with sort of hired guns, but it doesn't seem to have happened quite yet in the marathon. Oh, actually, Bahrain's there in about 12th, are they? But United States down below them. So
yeah.
Conor Mantz.
Yeah, that's from just a month ago in Chicago.
Yeah, so you'd expect to see a few countries up there, a little bit further on. Yeah. I was saying, if it comes to Wales, we've got Owen Zarelli because he just ran Valencia. He's one of our supporters. He ran 2:33.56, and I don't know if that's a PB or not. Well done, Owen. I found he's got the pick of 28 countries he could swap his allegiance to, and he'd get their national record and probably appear in the Olympics. So there you go, Owen. If you fancy that.
So that performance by Owens at the weekend it puts him between the national record of Sierra Leone and the Cayman Islands. And it's interesting because this is now the other end of this table, is the countries with the slowest national record in the marathon. I'll give you the bottom 5 is Niue, Norfolk Island, Palau, Turks and Caicos Islands, and then Nauru. And I did a little bit of research on this and try to find, like, what is the slowest country in the world at marathon running? And it's obviously, how do you define that, because, not many slow times are documented. But I found some data that in general, in the Pacific Islands is where the slowest marathon times are documented. Both their fastest and their average marathon times are the slowest in the world.
Isn't that just opportunity?
Yeah, I think probably largely just the size of the population, first of all, and then the opportunities that population is afforded. And the incentives to capitalize on them. Because, like, obviously in Africa, it's no coincidence that the men's top 4 are East African countries. And then obviously you get athletes with African descent in the next lot. And this is not a comment on any of those issues. Like, the guy who holds the Belgium record moved there as a youngster. So, Belgium can rightly say they can claim that record, but there's still African ancestry and descent in those record performances. There is, all the way until you get to Conor Mantz, actually, at the moment 13th place.
But also physiology as well. It's got to be for the Pacific Islanders, maybe. This because build is going to count for a lot of this.
Yes, and that's where I think it's interesting. So there's opportunity, population size, and then the intersection with their physiology. And I think we've said on the pod before, the countries that are at the equator, they developed as a survival mechanism to direct sunlight and heat is distal elongation. So they just got long limbs, long legs, long arms relative to their body height, because that helped you cool yourself off because of radiation. radiative cooling. And the opposite is true when you move further south. And in the Pacific Islands, I think you'll find that. You'll find different body compositions and different body types. And that's just, I think it's a really cool illustration of how we can be different. And it creates sporting performance implications.
Look, speaking of body composition, that's actually a nice segue into the next section.
It is such a good one. But there was one other thing I wanted to say about the records. And that was when you look at...
Thanks for that. I did a really good one. Ed.
I know. I debated letting you keep that one. But one interesting thing, just on that, is that in the women's top 10, obviously the number one national record in the world is Kenya's world record for Chepngetich. Shouldn't be, but it is. And the 10th best world record, national record for women is the USA. The difference between the first and the 10th is almost 9 minutes. Well, in fact, it's just over 9 minutes. Whereas the difference between the best national record and the 10th best national record for men is only 4 minutes. And it's just an interesting difference between the men and women that shows how the density of men's performances is much tighter than for women's. And you see this, you said earlier in this podcast, like Petros runs 2:04 and we say, only 2:04. That's only 3 minutes, just under 3 minutes off the world record. That winning performance in Valencia, which is the fourth fastest ever, is almost 5 minutes off the world record. So the women's performances are just much less dense than the men's ones. And part of that is also opportunity. I think, we have to always remember, like, women are at a much younger stage of their life cycle than the men's. And there's also been fewer opportunities. And I think it also speaks to less globalization because there hasn't been as much spread and movement of women around the world so that you've got athletes representing different countries with the same physiological attributes. Anyway, it was just something I wanted to mention. And so
I'm just looking at this now because you're looking at the same page as me, aren't you? Wikipedia, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I also
easily sortable.
And World Athletics, yes. But
see, I just noticed that Paula Radcliffe's in here twice because they've got England and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And I've noticed Steve Jones is up there for Wales, so they have got the Welsh records in there. That's sort of cheating because you can't have it both. You can't be England and United Kingdom in this. You're either one or the other.
At least
the other thing I noticed, and I've completely ruined my segue now because we're just off on another one. New Zealand, it's still Zane Robertson on this, who ran like a 2:18. So Wikipedia hasn't been updated in a long time.
Surely
because
not 2:18.
He's been stripped of that now. No.
2:18?
I'm pretty sure it was 2:18. And then his brothers now got it. Oh, no, sorry, 2:08 and 2:10, I think it was, sorry.
Yeah, that's more
if you
like
look for New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's 2:08. It's down here for Zane, but he got stripped of all his accomplishments. And now his brother's taking it over with, I think, a 2:10. So, I mean, the difference is Chepngetich didn't get caught and stripped, did she, until afterwards. Why did Zane get stripped?
Because she was caught at the right time from her perspective. She was caught after the performance, whereas he admitted to it during the time of the performance.
Yeah. So. But it's so frustrating because the crime is the same.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why they should be wiped. But anyway, that's gonna stick there for some time. I mean, if you can go and run 2:14 on a perfect day in Valencia and still be 4 and a bit minutes off that world record's gonna last a long time. So we're gonna say this frustration many times, I reckon.
Indeed. Speaking of frustration and body composition, there was an article in the Times this week about GLP-1 drugs, weight loss drugs. It says people are using weight loss drugs have been urged to do strength training to stave off potential muscle wasting, which is equivalent to 10 years of aging, which is the headline is obviously written that way to catch your eye. But the rapid rollout of GLP-1, it's shown dramatic results for patients, but it's really weakening the body. And you're not just losing fat on it, you're losing lean muscle mass. And I was amazed to find, it says here that there are 2.5 million people in the UK using weight loss drugs.
Staggering number. Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that widespread, to be honest with you. But as we know, the body likes balance. And so if you're messing with the balance one way with your calorific intake, the body's going to find other ways. And we're going to look at this a little bit later on with Red S and things like that. The body is going to find other ways to balance, and it's affecting your overall health. So there's a rapid and significant loss of mean mass, averaging about 6 kilograms per person, which you wouldn't expect in 10 years of aging. So that's quite concerning, because one of the problems I was thinking about this, and one of the problems is that, without sounding disrespectful, the people who require weight loss drugs are probably the people who are least likely to be incentivized or doing exercise anyway. And
Yeah.
so getting them to do strength work to maintain their health is going to be another huge challenge, because it's going to be a case of, I've lost the weight, that's well and good, but I don't need to do anything else.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's an interesting one. So GLPs came up again on this podcast earlier this year because WADA were talking about potentially looking at their legality in sport, because they may be performance enhancing, against the spirit, risk to cause harm, etc. And that would be enough to qualify a drug to be placed on the banned substance list. And we spoke about that a couple of months ago. Our feeling then was that they probably wouldn't be as widespread among athletes as you'd think, because one of the key requirements for athletes who are in training is they must replace energy, Graham Close, fuel for the work required. And so if you take a drug that suppresses your appetite and you still impose a demand for, let's say, 1,500 calories a day extra as a result of training, and in some athletes even more, depending on your sport, then how do you fuel the work required? And so we thought it would almost be a self-limiting system. This article sort of reinforces that a little bit. And it's interesting because I've spoken to some people in the last few weeks about going onto this drug. A couple of friends of mine, one is on it, one is considering it. And one of their big concerns is the loss of lean mass that is inevitable from them. And it's that article that mentions the 6 kilograms is the first time I'd seen a number assigned to it. And the thing that's even more interesting from the bigger picture is that, like, we all know that exercise is good for you, right? For the last 15, 20 years, there's this sort of catchline, hashtag exercise is medicine. And when you go to medical and sports medicine conferences, there's always a session called Exercise is Medicine, and someone will stand up and, like, there's literally no disease or illness or chronic condition under the sun that exercise doesn't help with. Yet these GLPs have come in so fast and they've displaced exercise from the conversation, to the extent that you, like, as you're saying, a person who struggled to lose weight and is obese or diabetic or both is now being given a drug to achieve the thing that people had hoped maybe exercise could help them with. But what is becoming increasingly apparent, I think, is that if you don't combine exercise with the drug, then you could lose on the other side of the weight loss, because you start losing lean mass and so forth. And even if it's just I don't want to call it vanity, but aesthetic concern. Some of the people on these GLP-1s, they look gaunt, they look hollowed out, they look aged because of the loss of lean mass. So I do think that's where the conversation's going to go. But it's amazing to me. I looked, okay, admittedly not for hours, but I looked for papers that have assessed a combination of GLP-1s with exercise for weight loss, not performance. That's a separate conversation. And you really don't find many of them. There's only 1 or 2 studies have tried to introduce exercise together with a GLP-1 agonist in order to try and see how it affects weight loss over a long time. And it's moving forward, like, that's going to have to be an area, because I do worry about this 2.5 million people on this thing with no idea about what lies over the horizon.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and let's make it clear, these drugs, they were designed for use for diabetic patients, weren't they, in a medical setting?
Yeah.
And I know I'm tarring, and I shouldn't, everybody with the same brush in a way, because obviously there are huge medical benefits for using them.
Mm.
But a lot of the people I've seen using them are using them purely for aesthetic purposes, for how they look. And people who probably don't even need to lose weight, but they've got a fixation about their weight or whatever, and they're using the drugs as a shortcut. And that sort of concerns me, because, again, these are the people, and I've got friends, close friends, who are using them, who I personally haven't said anything to them, that don't feel like you don't really need to use these, but neither would they exercise either. And so this loss of lean muscle mass would be concerning, because I know damn well they're not going to go to the gym or lift any weights at home or anything.
Yeah.
So no matter how much you tell them.
So, yeah, look, and I 100% agree. I think, And it's interesting, I don't want to just slam the GLPs, because I know we've actually, last time we raised this, there was some really good feedback and comments from some of our listeners who are on these drugs, these GLP-1 agonists, and who've related their very positive experiences. And I've seen graphs of obesity prevalence, and for the first time in decades that it's tilted down as a result of the introduction of these drugs. So they can, and I think will be, a really, really big force for positive change and health benefits. The danger is, I think they'll replace or only substitute exercise, and people don't realize and capitalize on the additive effect. Now, by nature of listening to this podcast, you're probably one of the people who does exercise if you are also using the drug. So you're probably in the minority who's first mover advantage. But it's interesting that there is one study. It's called the S-Light-1 study, where they have looked at what happens when you combine GLP-1 agonists with exercise. And it was an interesting study. They first restricted these people's diets for 8 weeks to cause 13 kilograms of weight loss. And then from that point on, so they've induced weight loss. And then from that point on, they give them either exercise, drug, or combination over the course of the next year. And sure as nuts, like as predictable as it gets, the combination of GLP-1 agonist and exercise produces the best 1 year outcomes in these people. So your appetite is suppressed, but you're also exercising, and so your weight loss is better 1 year later than if you only take the drug or if you only exercise, because you get appetite increases when you only exercise, and you get no exercise when you only take the drug. So they clearly do work in conjunction with one another, and I think the message needs to go out that people must focus on the exercise. As it pertains to sport, sorry, you were going to say is something on that?
No, see, this is the bit I don't get, and I think this is what you're about to roll on to, is how, if you've got no appetite and you're not getting the calories in, are you fueling for your sport?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I still think these latest discussions, this latest article, there's a review article, by the way, in which they call for resistance training. Those links will be in the show notes as usual. They make me more convinced than ever that these are probably not going to be widely used by elite athletes. That said, they still will be used by some. And at what point does it become widely used enough to ban or not used enough to not ban? I don't know. But like, we got a post from one of our listeners, Michael S., and he said in response to our previous discussion, he says, I wonder if you too broadly dismissed their performance-enhancing potential here based on our obsession with endurance sport, which is a fair enough accusation. We do obsess about endurance. But Michael says probably not for endurance sports, because as discussed, many endurance athletes are aiming to consume more, not less. But there are a number of sports where the sort of fueling required for road cycling and distance running is simply not needed, and which weight management is important to performance, e.g. gymnastics and climbing. So I take that point. I still wonder though, like if I'm an elite climber, how many hours a day do you think I'm training?
It's probably
not,
6 or 7, I would have thought.
It's not insignificant, right? So even if your training is not the same as a Tadej Pogacar or Remco Evenepoel doing 6 hours a day on the bike, your energy requirements in order to sustain even climbing or gymnastics training are still elevated compared to normal. Now, I've seen some studies where the use of these GLP-1 agonists reduces your calorie intake by between 400 and 800 calories per day. It's fascinating to now wonder if I then exercise and burn 1,500 to 2,000 per day, does the GLP-1 agonist suppress the appetite to the same extent, or can I suppress what's not needed but I still fuel for the work required? Those are all unanswered questions. So the simple answer is we don't know what happens when a person with high training volumes and intensities takes these drugs. We did hear from some of our listeners who said, and it's real interesting, this was in the context of road cycling, one of our listeners said that it's really difficult to consume enough energy during exercise, because even then your appetite is suppressed. So the 90 to 100 grams an hour of carbs we talk about, unattainable on those drugs. So that's where I wonder, I absolutely get the sports where weight management is important and the calorie intake doesn't need to be 4,000-5,000 a day. But even if it's 2.5, 3, I just wonder whether you can do it for a long time on these drugs.
See, we've got, I would say, reasonably, in fact, we know we've got very intelligent listeners who actually consider and think about the actions that they take. And so at least that listener has recognized and acknowledged that they're not getting in enough calories and is then likely to do something about it.
Mm.
But it's what concerns me are the uninformed people who aren't going to be thinking about this and are just thinking, wow, I'm losing so much weight. I look so amazing. But the health implications are huge. And this does apply actually to intelligent athletes because we've seen it with climbers before. That's why they had to bring in
Yeah.
sort of weight management rules
Yeah.
because climbers will do anything to lose weight. And of course, these drugs are, they're manna from heaven for if you want to lose weight.
Mm.
But we see it in cycling, and we've seen it with Red S, and we've seen it recently this week, haven't we? With Veronica Ewers
Yeah.
of is it
US.
Education Easy posts Oatly, um, because she's come out this week and she's talked, bravely and candidly about her struggles with her weight, her perception of her weight, and how it's brought on over the years. I think over a decade, massive problems with Red S, which is what relative energy.
Deficiency in
Uh,
sport.
Deficiency in
Yeah.
sport, yeah,
Yeah.
which we've talked about before, and she's been really open and candid about it. I know you found a blog of hers, a Substack of hers, didn't you? Which was you found fascinating.
Yeah, I gather it's a new Substack. Her first post ever, as far as I can tell, is this one, and it was published on the 2nd of December, and it's called Sadada, which I'm reliably informed is a Galician word for a melancholic longing for something that's absent. And so she's written this piece, and it's a really introspective piece titled "Aching for the Past Version of Myself." I'll put the link in the show notes as always, and you'll read a story of someone who very clearly, for the best part of a decade, has been vulnerable to disordered eating and obsessive exercise. Now, those are the two elements that go into the perfect storm for creating a Red S candidate like this. And hers is an extreme case. She ends up sitting on the side of a road and has to be picked up by two guys who take her to hospital. She is basically paralyzed because her kidneys are in full failure mode. She has to be fed intravenously for a while to get her normal physiological function going. And that's kind of like the bottom that she reaches after this 10-year journey. And so, just for the benefit of those who haven't heard our prior discussions, Red S is literally, as it says, it's the relative energy deficiency. So it's a combination of intake that is too low relative to the output as a result of exercise. So anyone who is exercising with potentially high volumes and intensities, and therefore burning through a lot of fuel, but who then underfuels that exercise, is a risk candidate for developing Red S. And when that happens, different things happen in different people, but in women, for instance, metabolic function is disrupted. Reproductive function is often the first to go. We did a podcast earlier this year discussing some of those issues and how they develop. And so women then stop having periods. She talks in her article that she hasn't had a period since 2014, so that's 11 years worth. But I want to encourage you to read the piece because it's so alarming to see how little things happen along the way that with the benefit of hindsight you go, oh, that's not good. It's like a series of sliding door moments, and every time you go the wrong way. So for instance, she talks about as a university football player, soccer player in the northwest of the US, she fell into what she describes, her words, not mine, though I agree, the bullshit fad of the paleo diet became the rage into which I fell. Not only did I start to avoid any and all carbohydrates, I also denied myself any going out for food to make sure I had full control of what I ate. That's a pattern people will recognize, is control of food and not doing things that allow you to lose control. At another point, she talks about how she'd run 6 miles before and after practice, and that she poured all her energies into the discipline of training and restricting fuel. Now, coaches weren't picking her. She got more and more resentful. She trained harder and harder. So it's this vicious cycle that she then goes on. She talks about how in 2015 she goes to Spain for a period of to study abroad. And she says there was a fat mass machine in the gym. And the main goal of my study abroad was to drop that number as low as possible. I achieved that goal, but it still wasn't enough. So she falls into what I've called before like a measurement trap. Later on in the piece, she talks about wearable technology. I wanted to read that bit to you. She says, she becomes a personal trainer while she's kind of looking to figure out what to do with her life. And she's got these clients, and she'd see them, and she says, I would run on the treadmill between training sessions with clients and do as much as I could. Once I snagged a wearable device, everything got worse. I had to hit a certain number of calories burned every day. That number grew daily, and my food intake shrank. So all these little things, the wearable tech, the scale, the comparison to other people, they're such common elements for people. And I know a lot of people listen to this who are coaches, parents of young athletes. I really read this piece because it'll give you an insight into how what she calls the demon gets control of a person. Now, what's interesting is she starts cycling in Seattle quite late. She comes to the sport quite late, achieves success really quickly. So within a year or two, she goes from cycling in Seattle to a stint in Europe. And it's interesting, she says, I expected the culture in Europe to be similar to that of my team in Seattle. Man, was I wrong. The competition didn't end at the bike race. It kept going in the kitchen and at the dinner table. Wandering eyes could help you win. The less you ate, the more superior you were. Who could eat the least and still make it look like enough? The demon returned with a vengeance. I had to win at this game. And so begins the cycle. She ends up bulimic because she suffers an injury that then keeps her off the bike. So she says that at that point, I'm reading again, I turned to food to cure my isolation, my disappointment, my lack of self-worth. I consumed anything and everything, especially foods I would normally say I couldn't have. Nothing was off limits. I ate until I was so full, I thought I'd burst. Then I made it all go away until I was empty. The instant relief from discomfort soothed me. I became addicted to the sensation. Even when I got back to serious training and racing, the weight continued to come up and I was somehow still flying, so it was working right. And she talks many times about how people would come to her and say, you're looking so good, you're riding so well, so obviously what you're doing is good. And so she was being affirmed in these secretive behaviors that were destructive until it got too much. So it really is, it's a very candid piece, and I think a very informative piece for people who want to understand how these worst case scenarios develop.
It's an absolutely heartbreaking piece, to be honest with you. I mean, I've got personal experience of eating disorders through a partner I was with many years ago. And from the outside, they are virtually impossible to understand because you can't put yourself in the shoes of the person. And so it's very difficult then to also comment on if you can't understand it. But my concern, going back to what we were talking about with GLP-1 drugs, is the availability of them with athletes as well. Is they're just going to magnify a situation like this, which she found herself in. Because if 10 years ago she'd had the opportunity to use these drugs as well, she surely would have.
Oh, there's
and
no
that
doubt.
Would have made, as she says, the demon's even worse.
Yeah, there's no doubt. You know, you could run that hypothetical a million times and you'll come to the same place. This is an athlete who, as a university student, would have found someone to give them this drug. Yeah.
And the tech is another interesting aspect of it, that we are slaves to our tech, aren't we? We are,
yeah.
And again, we count our steps, we count our calories, we become obsessed by it. This is an extreme form of that obsession. And, you know, we're not a dieting, weight loss sort of podcast or anything. We're looking at the sports side of it. But it is incredibly important to understand that the information, we've got information overload, as she did. But we've got to be accountable with ourselves, haven't we? But surely she should have had people picking up her coaches and that.
That's the interesting thing. Look, there's a few interesting things, and I think a few very potentially helpful things for people who might experience or go through the same. But it is really interesting to me that in a world where performance is the objective, like you wake up every day saying, how can we be better today on the bike? And one of the ways and we've discussed this, I'd be surprised if it's fewer than 20 times this year on this podcast, is fueling and nutrition on bike, post bike, recovery, etc. is so important. It's quite astonishing to think that in a professional cycling team, you could exist and survive and thrive, because she was 4th at the Giro and 9th in the original Tour de France FOM, right? So she was not just coping, she was actually excelling despite all these destructive behaviors and her, what she calls demon. And yet no one in the team environment was picking that up. And I think it's testament to A, how well people hide it, and B, how the environment might not necessarily be geared to look for it. And so if your performance is good, then why would anyone ask the question? The first sign that there's a problem, for her, for instance, she talks about, I think it was in the Vuelta, I don't have it in front of me now, but she was riding in the Vuelta, stage 2 of a week-long stage race, and she says, I completely bonked. I was empty on the side of the road thinking, how am I going to do this? Later on, she says the same thing happened to her in the Tour de France, and then she crashes out and then leads to her collapse at the side of the road on a training ride back in the United States. So she was able to survive and excel despite these behaviors. And I think it shows actually how incredible the body is. Because how do you sustain 20 hours a week of training on what she was clearly doing? She was like bulimic, not eating enough. It's astonishing. And maybe in this conversation, we're getting to the point where actually we can talk about GLP-1s inhibiting appetite and energy intake and so on, but athletes will do it, and she actually shows that you can actually get away with it for a really long time.
Well, she got away with it, sort of, because she said she hasn't had a period since 2014. She says, and this is her quote, my bones are weak, my gastrointestinal function is shit. It was doing, possibly irreparable damage to her body. The body was coping, but it was just removing any functionality away from what it deemed non-necessary systems.
Yeah.
Just to ride a bike.
But it shows you
and
how
don't
the
you think
priorities...
that cycling teams perhaps are enablers?
Yeah. It shows you what the priorities are, though, right? Because those things had to have been there, but no one cared because the watts were good. Well, not that no one cared. I don't want to. That's unnecessarily harsh. I'm sure they cared, like because they were still people. We're not brutes, even in professional sports teams. But I think no one noticed, and I think that's the point: is that the environment probably isn't geared to pick up anything other than the priority, which is the cycling number, the watt, the speed, the position in the race, the ranking points, whatever it is.
Yeah, but we had this discussion, didn't we, in the Tour de France Femme with Bram Perrault. Because she lost 4 kilos, didn't she, for that was it the Col de Madeleine?
Yeah, for the whole race. But you're right. Yeah, she focused on winning the race on that day, thanks to body weight, power to weight.
I mean, and she turned around and said, "Look, I know what I'm doing," and so she did it with full. Yeah. There was a big discussion at the time whether it was healthy for cycling, whether it was setting a good image, etc. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, to be clear,
it's a tricky subject.
It can be. It is. I think in her case, though, to be clear, like that goes down. Pauline Ferrand-Prévot losing that weight to win that Tour de France goes down as a success story, right? It's hard to argue it any other way. 100%. She targeted, here's how I'm going to win the Tour de France. This is what needs to be done. I did it. I mean, maybe, look, we're sitting here speculating, we don't know, but I'm going to assume that she's now back to her regular weight. And we know that we spoke to Trent Stellingwerff about weight, cycling, and body composition periodization. And he spoke about how his wife, who was an elite middle distance runner, her body weight would fluctuate by 10% over the course of a year. And they would manipulate body composition through a combination of training and diet. And it was healthy and it was done according to a plan. That's a very different situation to yours, who's just, when you read the piece, it's kind of like a spiral out of control and just a loss of all normal physiological function. So very, very different. But I think the key point is it does happen, like and when you talk about it, as it was spoken to about Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, a lot of people said, no, don't comment on this, it's sexist. A lot of people said, no, we'll comment like we want to because it's necessary. And there obviously needs to be a way to have this conversation that doesn't sound sort of paternalistic and judgmental. And at the time, and I wanted to read this because it was Joanne Ernst posted, and she posted some great posts this year. This was one of the most memorable to me. She ended up becoming an Ironman world champion in Kona. But she writes here, still, as a female athlete and former pro in endurance sport, some of the arguments made around Pauline Ferrand-Prévot are well-meaning but naive and indeed paternalistic. Competitive female and male athletes have been losing weight to gain an edge for a long time. Sometimes under pressure from coaches, parents, peers, or the media. Sometimes they get it right, like Pauline, and find the success they were striving for. Sometimes they get it wrong and find themselves mired in eating disorders and underperforming because they've mismanaged the balance. And I think Ewers is an absolute extreme manifestation of that for reasons not related to sport. It's clear when you read Ewers' piece, there's psychological factors going on there, her personality and her environment, etc., all contributed. But Joanne says women have responsibility for the choices we make, just like all adult humans. We can and should be allowed to make our own choices and make mistakes, even when the consequences can be serious. Education is the best route for helping everyone make wise choices. But don't restrict our ability to make choices for ourselves because you fear we aren't capable of weighing the risks. And that's kind of in response to this question around, should sport do something to stop these things from happening? Should a team have a BMI limit and they don't let a cyclist race below a certain BMI? And I agree with Jan. I don't think that works in cycling. You have to let people do it, but educate them about how to do it well.
Education and support. It's the teams recognizing this, or any federations or whatever recognizing that the issue is there. And that's why WADA, this is important now that WADA get it right over the GLP-1 drugs. Either way.
Yes, yeah, actually, it is. And I mean, this whole conversation has made me sort of almost rethink. When you know that there's a likelihood of a Ewers or even less severe than that, should you ban the GLP just for the worst case scenario? You know, you don't worry about what's going to happen in 9 out of 10 people. You worry about the 1 in 10. Maybe there's an argument to be made. That's the sort of thing they'll have to weigh up and consider. Because even though it's not optimal for performance, it's still going to happen. Because what Ewers did is suboptimal performance, and there's the story.
You see, I'm torn. I'm saying yes, protect the athletes.
Yeah.
Don't give, because one of the 3 things with WADA is one that it doesn't damage your health.
Yeah, harm.
But we know this damages your health. And then, and you'd picked up exactly the same paragraph that I was going to read from Joanne. Don't restrict our ability to make choices for ourselves because we fear that we aren't capable of weighing the risks. And to make this clear, this isn't only a female issue. This is for men as well.
Yeah.
People should be able to make choices themselves because they are capable of weighing the risks. So I'm totally torn. I really don't know. For once, I don't envy WADA in making the decision.
It's an interesting one because, like, I think we even started this conversation saying, look, there's no real performance benefit, so what's the point banning it? But you're right. If it's against the spirit of the sport and if it's harmful, there doesn't need to be a performance benefit. And so they may ban it on 2 of the other 3 criteria that they have. But it's such a difficult one. And, you know, it's interesting, like, I think teams can probably create support structures that de-emphasize performance and rather look at other health elements. That's the big thing that I wonder about you is do they do medical checks on these athletes every year? Are they measuring physiological function that might have revealed that there were some of these underlying issues? Even psychological screening of athletes would potentially help. Like you found a paper in which 20 sub-elite and elite triathletes, I think, were screened. And there are now questionnaires that identify who's at risk of REDS and who's not and so on. And athletes like Ewers and others, they become really adept at hiding the issue, like keeping their demons secret. So it might be that they can cheat those questionnaires and you don't find them, but you've got to still try. Like even when we were at, earlier this year when I was still working at the Stellenbosch High School, we identified a handful of girls that the coaches felt were at risk of disordered eating and potentially REDS. And a medical doctor who works well with young kids can talk to them, and quite quickly you establish certain patterns and you identify who's at risk, who's at not, and then you can intervene. And the world of professional sport just doesn't do that well enough, I don't think, still. And that's what this case reminds us, I think.
Yeah, going that study that you mentioned there, because it was like really worrying, because it said that the risk of RED-S was prevalent in 30% of female triathletes, and 50% showed at least one symptom related to low energy availability. So perhaps the problem is bigger than we know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's I think GLP-1 drugs, this debate, especially with WADA, is going to be one of the big issues coming up now in 2026, for sure. And I know that we want to cover it better in a feature pod. We have been talking about that because one of the not criticisms we get of Spotlight is sometimes we're a bit superficial. Like the shoes last week when we talked about the shoes and the injury. there were so many ways we could have taken that conversation, and it came up in discourse after with lots of comments from the supporters saying, "Oh, you could have mentioned this," and some excellent posts. We've had a surgeon come in on showing us where the bones were that got broken
Yeah,
and
and
why
how
they
they
don't heal
break.
well, and
Yeah.
lots of things like that. But and that's the thing with Spotlight, we don't have the time to cover everything in depth. We're sort of touching on it, giving some thoughts, and then if it gets what did you call it yesterday? A canary in a coal mine. We
Yeah,
sort
it's
of
kind
send
of
these
like a
topics like a canary into a coal mine, and if it dies, we'll do a feature pod on it.
yeah, it's the anti-canary in a coal mine because if it dies, we abandon it. If it survives, we do a feature on it. But you're right. So like these spotlights are always the first word. And if you're listening to this, here's my pitch that I forgot to do earlier. If you are listening to this and you have some insights or you would like to discuss more about these kind of topics, our supporters club, which you join through Patreon, you become a patron of the site at the link in the show notes. That gives you access to our community chat rooms over on Discourse, and that's where the conversation continues. But yeah, the GLP thing. I mean, even in this conversation, I'd say my thoughts are evolving around the GLP-1s. Every time I read something or think or talk about it, like something else shifts. And at some point, when it's all shifted enough, we have to tackle it because it's gonna. You're right. I mean, if 2.5 million people in the UK alone are on them, and they've come in and they've replaced exercise, that's a big potential problem that's going to have to come to will be addressed because it will come to a head. So that's definitely there. And I think the Red S thing, we'll leave it there now, but it's clearly a massive factor for all the talk about how athletes will get it right for nutrition and so on. They don't, because there are sometimes bigger things at play than just performance. So yeah.
Yeah. So, which sport that you know nothing about do you fancy trying to cover today? Because we've done it for the last 2 weeks with Formula One and then squash. We've talked about a sport that we don't know anything about, and then we've got absolutely schooled on discourse by people who know more about it than we do. Because I think it was
Educated.
Mickey B who gave me who gave me an education on sport this week. So, what do you fancy this week?
Uh,
Chess,
uh,
the 3-year-old.
Chess with a 3. Yeah, I'll take it and bring it to home ground advantage in no time at all when we do that one. But how about a 3-year-old achieving master status? That's unbelievable.
No, he hasn't got master status, is he? I think he's
What's
just
this
got
a
he's the
rating?
youngest player. It's a 3-year-old. It's India's Sarwaya Singh Kushwaha. He's become the youngest player in chess history to earn an official FIDE ranking at the
A
age of
ranking.
3 years, 7 months, and 20 days. And I've led into this one because I think one of the topics that we've been covering all year, and obviously we're going to be covering in the future, is youth in sport, isn't it? These precocious youths that we come up with every now and again. We've had gout, haven't we, over the last year or so? We've got is it Sam Ruthie,
The New
the New
Zealander,
Zealand
and then
runner?
Cooper Lutkenhaus. Olympic Games 2036,
Mm,
the middle distance title will be fought out by those blokes.
yeah, I think that's going to be another big story. These are going to be big stories again. I think a thread running through the upcoming year and that.
Exactly. Because the
And of course,
thing
we had
is,
Malcolm, didn't we, talking about youth?
yeah, thing is, these are stories no matter what happens because they either succeed and then you say, wow, remember when that guy was 11, 12 years old or 15 and was already a world class athlete? Or they don't succeed and then they become, cautionary tale out of New Zealand. Is So either way, it's a story. But they are so fascinating. You're right. And Malcolm was on the pod this year, Gladwell, and he called it the compression of adolescence and how our obsession with early results and competitive sport has in effect forced an earlier age of maturation and performance in these youngsters. And when I now see Sam Ruth, I don't know if you say Ruthie or Ruth, New Zealander, at,
Ruthie? I don't
at
know.
16, and he was on our radar, right? Because earlier this year he ran a crazy sub 4 minute mile, I think it was, youngest guy ever to do that. He broke a long-standing New Zealand record last week. Obviously, we all saw Cooper Lutkenhaus qualify for the world champs at the age of 16. Gout, we had an interview lot. So we're tracking all these athletes, and it's just so interesting to wonder, like, what proportion of them actually kicks on. And so now you get a 3-year-old chess player, and the first thing I think is 10,000 hours. How has this guy done 10,000 hours? He's 3. He's barely been alive that long.
I mean, his father said we want him to become a grandmaster, so no pressure on the kid. He's not even turned 4
Well,
yet.
that's always there in the
Uh,
background with these youngsters as the parents. Like when we spoke earlier this year about was it an 11-year-old South African kid signing for Chelsea or Liverpool? His brother signed for one and
yeah,
he
it was.
signed for the other.
Man City and Chelsea, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
The parents in this is so interesting to me because they often have the best intentions in the world, and that intentions, what's the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
I don't want to harp on, but it's going to be not long before the first story of a parent who's got their kids on GLP-1 drugs to reduce weight. I don't know what the age limit is on those. I presume, and I hope it's 18.
Where will that be? Do you think that'll be a gymnast in the US or somewhere?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Or cycling.
Maybe.
Because
maybe.
I read an article with Matt White. He used to be the director of J.K. Olulia. He's with Movie Star now, and he wrote an article. We can put it in the show notes, and he's talking about development teams paying 17, 18-year-olds 20 grand a year, which used to be the entry level for a pro rider and all that. It doesn't seem a lot these days, I know, but he's talking about the burnout cycle in cycling now, where if a kid doesn't make it within a few years, then the next few come along. There's no long-term development of athletes anymore. So, of course, again, as we always say, it's people. At the end of the day, these are still people. They're athletes, but they're people.
Yeah.
And you're just continually searching for the next big thing.
So why do those systems not self-correct? If a system starts to reward youth earlier and earlier, at some point it becomes massively inefficient, right? Because used to be you made a selection of a 22-year-old, and out of every 100 selections, 65 had good pro careers and 10 were world class, let's say. Now you're making that pick at 18, 19, and instead of 65 having pro careers, it's going to be 25, and only 2 out of 100 are going to make a real big impact as pros. And it's just, I dare say it's the same in football, it'll be the same in rugby. The younger you pick, the less likely you are to pick well. So why don't they fix it? That to me is the interesting philosophical question.
Because perhaps there's more money at a certain end of sport, and you can just throw more money at the problem.
That's certainly part of it.
Seems like UAE.
Teams
like UAE, they don't need to do that. They just throw money at the problem.
Right.
So buy their way out of it.
So that's definitely part of it. As they've expanded and they've become more wealthy, the growth has gone down. Not necessarily. It's gone up also. Let's face it, the guys 20 years ago were not making what Pogacar, Evenepoel, Ayuso, Almeida, etc. are making now, Van der Poel. But a lot of it goes younger. But one interesting thing, and we sort of end off maybe on this one, is, what was it, 10 years ago, the English Rugby Football Union had a big workshop symposium on youth rugby and what they needed to change in their system. And I went along to that and presented along with a whole bunch of other people, and they had all sorts of panels and deliberations. And one of the conclusions from that was that in rugby in particular, it makes no sense at all to make strong selections at 14, 15, 16 years of age. Because the sport is so hugely influenced by your size and your weight that by the time you get to adulthood, what you look like at 15, 16 is almost irrelevant. So when you pick tall 14, 15-year-olds, they're not always the tallest 18, 19-year-olds, but because height matters, you pick wrongly. Does that make sense? Have I explained that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
You're in effect, you're placing a bet on early developers, but by the time the late developers have caught up, your bet looks stupid. That's what happens. But the problem they've got is they can't not pick young, because if they don't pick, another sport picks. And so because you exist in a competitive market, the biggest thing is the opportunity cost. Because if I didn't pick, and that's what's driving these ridiculous decisions to sign 11-year-olds in football teams, is because if I don't do it at Chelsea, Man City does it. And if that's the 1 in 100 that goes on to be, I was going to say Lionel Messi, but rather go with Phil Foden, then I lost out. And so it's the unrealized opportunity cost that's driving the inefficiencies in the system. And it's the same thing for parents. If I don't encourage them, if I don't send them for extra training, if I don't pay for the tour down to New Zealand on the rugby tour or wherever it is, if I don't make them do after school lessons or whatever, they're going to fall behind. It's the FOMO that's driving these inefficiencies. And it must be, I'm not envious of parents who have to deal with that, because it must be so difficult to see your kid's friends training when he's not. Because you think, is that the thing that's going to cost him a professional career? It's mad. The society's gone crazy with this stuff.
The only way to beat that sort of race to the bottom is to get everybody to
Exactly.
sing from the same hymn sheet. But of course, it's a capitalist sport. Is like a capitalist society,
Yeah.
and so everybody's in competition with each other. You're not going to get
Correct.
all the Premiership clubs to agree. Okay, we're not going to recruit until a certain age unless they are absolutely forced
Yeah,
to,
policy has
because as
to
soon as
force
one
it.
breaks ranks, they all will.
Exactly. And I remember
Yeah.
saying as well,
I mean,
it's like if there's a street with coffee shops in it, and this was my stupid analogy at the time. And some scientist comes along and says, you know what, all the research shows that you shouldn't have coffee before 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're going to have a policy now that you can't serve coffee before 10 in the interest of people's health. One coffee shop will say, forget that, I'm going to serve. And then all the coffee shops have to do the same, because they'll all go out of business if they don't. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening in sport. It's just a race to the bottom,
but
driven by the fact that one team, UAE, whoever it is, they can afford inefficiencies that other people can't.
do we see it working in countries with more nationalized systems like China, for example, where the state often takes control of sport?
Uh,
Does that work better, I wonder?
I don't know. I think they must have
Apart
massive
from the doping
inefficiencies.
aspect.
And also just massive inefficiencies. Like I've heard, I don't know much about it, right? It'd be fascinating to go in there and spend 6 months checking how they do it. But I remember the one time I was there, and I subsequently read somewhere, they've got like a center for table tennis, and there are hundreds, if not more, youngsters playing table tennis, and it literally is survival of the fittest. You emerge from that as an 18-year-old, you're winning an Olympic medal. If you don't, well, find something else to do. I remember what it was weightlifting, and they said that they'd take these young prospective teenagers, strong teenagers with weightlifting potential, put them in these facilities and these camps, and just train them as hard as they could. It's like that old East German model. So I think they're as
It's
inefficient.
no better then.
Yeah, I think it's probably just...
It's probably as inefficient and probably just as dehumanizing.
Yeah, it could well be. Anyways, that's... Hey, this has been quite heavy. We've spoken about...
It was meant to be a light one today.
Yeah. It's been quite heavy, like dehumanizing, disordered eating, weight loss. Yikes. That's not very festive. But it's certainly...
But interesting.
It's been extremely interesting. I'm sure there'll be, as usual, a lot of comments and feedback. You know how to get into that, folks. You become a supporter of the Science of Sport. Even if you don't fancy the conversation and you enjoy listening, become a supporter at Patreon. Links in the show notes. That's it for today. We've got another pod we're recording tomorrow, which should come out later. And then, as I say, we've got our year-end recap, looking back at some of the Science of Sport highlights from 2025. So that should be a lot of fun without the heaviness of today. So we'll chat to you again at some stage. For now, though, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.